Hey everybody, this is James P. Wagner here with Local Gems Press.
Hi, and I'm Nick Hale with Local Gems Press.
Yep, so we're the publishers, and this is the Publishers Speakeasy. This is a little thing we do to answer questions that we frequently get, especially behind the scenes at poetry events live. And we decided, hey, don't tell anybody, but we're going to answer them, here online, so we don't have to have the same conversations over and over again. But we're probably going to anyway, so that's fine. But yeah, so we get questions from people and doing our best to answer them. But this question, and this is one we actually get pretty much all the time in a lot of cases, and we actually do entire seminars on this topic. So if you're interested in any of those, keep an eye out for that for the marketing and the selling and all that stuff. But uh, we'll do the best to answer this question and just the best way we can here. And the best way, the question is, what is the best way to get your poetry book out there? And like I said, we've done entire seminars and seminar series on this topic. So we could go on it for a long, long time because there's a lot of different angles on how to answer that question. But the one thing that we always say to people, first and foremost, is that until the age of robots doing our purchasing for us, which may actually be closer than we kind of want, I hope not. But usually buying and selling is a person to person thing. And so the one thing that really kind of sells poetry books or anything is relationship. So the best way to get your book out there and get people to actually be buying it, assuming that's the question. I mean, I guess, that's an interpretation of the question. I guess if somebody's just saying the best way to get your book out there would be to, I guess, spend $1 million, print the copies and just send them to everybody in your town or city. But I'm going to assume that it's not the way that most people would do it.
Well, you
Uh,
could get in the back of a truck, like a pickup truck, stand on the bed of a pickup truck, and take your books and just like throw them as the pickup truck is going. That gets it pretty far out there.
Yeah, you do it like the paper route, just throw them out
Exactly.
there. Yeah, but I'm assuming that's not the way that they actually meant the question. That's one possible interpretation of it. But yeah, the best way to get it out there is to just develop a lot of people out there who will have a relationship one way or the other with you or your poetry in particular. And there's a million ways to do that in the world that we live in today. With the internet, kind of makes it easier than ever. Because I mean, let's just be honest here. Nobody, okay, not nobody. I'm sure that there's a few people who do, but pretty much nobody just goes on to like Amazon, for example, is like, let me look up what random book of poetry by somebody that I don't know is doing today and let me buy it. I'm sure there's some people who maybe just do that like as a game of poetry roulette.
Yeah.
But most people, if they're going to look for a book of poetry or a book of anything really that they're looking for, unless they're like picking it up for a quarter in a bargain bin because, oh, look, I found that. I know something about that running a used bookstore. But usually they're going with intents to actually get a book by somebody that they actually know and they have a relationship with, like Stephen King. A lot of people have a relationship with Stephen King. And so, all you need is to hear the name Stephen King and you go and get that book. For us poets, it's maybe not as good as that. Maybe the title of the book leads before our name. But if we have any kind of established following whatsoever, or people who are familiar with our stuff, that's really the best way to get your book out there.
Yeah, I mean, I know a few people who might who might do that. I can think of off the top of my head. Hi, if you're listening.
Yeah.
But probably one of my favorite questions. I run a local poetry group, and I get questions. I get this question all the time from random people I've never met. How do I sell my book to your group? That's that. I mean, sometimes they're a little less blunt than that, but that's really what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is really easy. First, you come to one of our meetings, then you come to another one, then you come to another one, and you make some friends in the group. And then you just officially join the group and you participate in the events and the things that we do. And then you tell us about your book.
Yeah.
So notice how the book part actually comes last. A lot of people's mistake is that they lead with their book. They're like, "Yeah,
Uh-huh.
hey man, I have a book. You want to buy it?" And I'm like, "No, who are you?" you know. So
Yeah, and I could say this from the angle also as a bookstore owner because since I've opened this bookstore, I get a bajillion and a half. That's a real number. Uh, queries from people about I have a book. You want to sell my book in your store? And I can't tell you how many of them that's about the extent of the information that they give me to
well,
start off with. And it's like, okay, like maybe, but probably not if that's all the information you're giving me. It's like, what's the benefit to my store
it's
to to having this book? Like, are you a local author here? And so there might be that angle. Do you have family and friends who might come in and buy this book here. It's like, does it fit with like some other stuff I have in the store, or like, whatever. It's like, give me some more info, so there's that, first of all. Second of all, it's really, like, there's a legitimate way to go about and ask somebody, like, this might be a fit for your audience. And then there's just, sort of spamming, like you were just talking about, essentially.
It's that sort of mindset is like the selling equivalent of the mindset I see a lot of people who really fail at dating when they're young, of like, I'm a man, you like men, we should get together. And it's
I
like,
know a couple of who you're talking
I
about.
know there's a little bit more nuance to it than that. And it's the same thing with selling your book. There's a little bit more nuance to selling than just, oh, you're looking for a book, I have a book. It's like, oh, you're looking for a power tool, I have a power tool. Here, take my chainsaw. Really, all you need is a drill.
Yeah. So
So
those nuances definitely help a little.
yeah.
But yeah, so like, you want to build an audience or readership organically and, genuinely, because, I mean, no, first of all, everybody likes buying things, but nobody likes being sold to, so it's like, if you're going to come out with that hard sell in the beginning, like, all you're going to do is piss people off. Nobody likes that. Like the people who show up to a poetry reading, they get up to the open mic the first time they've ever been there, like, hi, I'm so and so, and this is my book if you want to buy it. It's like, and you're starting that before like they've even heard your poetry or have any way to relate to you whatsoever. On the flip side, if you've gone to a poetry reading, like every reading for like about a year, and people know you, and you're like, hey, guess what, I'm coming out with a book, I'm going to be launching it like, 2 Fridays from now at this venue or whatever. If anybody wants to do it, you're probably going to get people that way because people are familiar with you and your work. And, and that's just like one of a million ways. Cause, if you can, with the tools that we have now with the internet, it's like, you could put up a poetry blog and you could, post a lot of your poetry and get readers who are like actually a fan of your stuff just by reading it and finding it online. And maybe, you tag like what the topic is to get people that way. And you could just build it up like that.
Yeah, a lot of people are still stuck on the conventional wisdom of the last century, um, which is, don't take no for an answer. Use the hard sell, and you'll close more deals that way. And um, broadcast.
Mm-hmm.
And really, it might seem counterintuitive because a lot of uh, a lot of stuff has changed, but a lot of the best sales techniques are exactly the opposite of that. The soft sell, building relationships first before making people aware of your product, gives them a reason to want to buy it other than the product itself, because they like you, they've got a relationship with you. Soft selling is much more effective, a lot less in your face, and a lot less like, I go out of my way to avoid hard sellers. I hate it when somebody is trying to sell stuff to me, more than most people. Like, most people don't like to be sold to. I really don't like to be sold to. And so I will slam the door in your face. And I'm not usually that rude of a person, but like, I hate it. It drives me nuts. So um when you use that technique on certain people like me, uh you're not just turning them off, you're turning them way off to the point where they're going to discourage other people
Yeah.
your product. So you want to be careful with that. And with broadcasting, you're going to waste a lot of time and resources trying to tell as many people about your thing as possible,
Mm-hmm.
rather than going for the people who are actually going to be interested in it. And your time is much better spent looking for the 12 people who are going to buy something than trying to get the 1,200 people and then maybe getting like a half a percent of them.
Yeah. And like, I'll tell you a little story about the difference between broadcasting and narrowcasting. And this is there's a poet laureate that I know, who shall remain nameless to protect the innocent. But back, and this was like before the internet was really as big as it was. This was like some point in the 90s. They came out with a book, and this book had a particular topic. It was dealing with the topic of fatherhood, for example. And they did what a lot of poets do, and they put out a general ad in Poets and Writers magazine. Nothing against Poets and Writers magazine, great magazine, but one may notice there's a lot of poets advertising a lot of poetry books in there. And so put out like a little ad just about that, just generically, this is the poetry book, blah blah blah. And they proceeded to sell exactly 0 copies from the Poets and Writers ad, because it was basically just leading with the, hey, I'm so and so, this is my poetry book. And they also weren't a laureate back then. Maybe if they had that title back then, they would have sold a few just by the title. But so they sold 0 copies in that. A couple of years later, they decided to actually run an ad in a magazine that had to do with family. And it was basically, this is the book and this is the theme. And they sold, I forget the exact number, but it was something like 120 or 130 copies from running that one ad, because they sold it to a magazine that had much more of a niche, much less competition, because I don't know how many poetry books are being advertised in there, but also because it was a genuine fit. This was a family magazine about, family parenting, etc. This was a book having to do with fatherhood. It fit. So in those cases, that's like an organic way to build a relationship. And also the definition really kind of helped, because that's one thing that poets kind of do that we both love. By love we mean we really don't love, not very much at all.
Well, it's funny.
Yeah, it's funny but it's the same thing. It's like, hey, I just came out with a book of poetry. Okay, and like, what's it about? Like, poetry leads with it's a poetry more than anything else. Nobody's like, oh, this is my fiction book, you want my fiction book? It's like, no, it's like, this is my mystery thriller novel about the Black
Right.
Widow who had 7 husbands who mysteriously died and she inherited a fortune. It's like, you lead with a description, to see people are going to want it. With poetry, we just emphasize the poetry, not the what the poetry is about, because somebody may want poetry about nature, and maybe not poetry about axe murderers, for example. Like, maybe
Right.
that.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, oh, I just came out with a movie.
Yeah.
Okay. What's it about? Oh, it's about weightlifting. Well, like a story about a weightlifter? No, no, I just lift weights and you get to watch.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you want to drill down into the details of what the book is about. That's the best way to get it out there. And honestly, selling to kind of steal your point for a second, James, selling to non-poets,
Yeah.
because like poetry is one of those only mediums, not just where people try to sell it based on the fact that it's poetry and then they don't go any deeper into it. A lot of people think really deep inside this box of like, oh, the only people who are going to be interested in poetry are poets and poetry fans. But
Hmm.
there's always that extra dimension to your book that most people leave unnoticed. Like, is your poetry about, weightlifting? Well, maybe fans of Arnold Schwarzenegger want to buy that poetry book.
Yeah.
Who knows? There are a lot. There's a lot more out there than just people interested in poetry. In fact, people interested in poetry are usually more interested in very specific types of poetry. They're interested in formal poetry. They're interested in classical poetry. They're interested in the poetry that they wrote.
Hmm.
But most poets will have a very specific niche of poetry that they're interested in. So being able to drill down into that niche is going to help you get your book out there, not just because you're going to appeal to the right poets, but you're going to appeal to the right non-poets. And
Oh
appealing to
yeah.
the right non-poets is important.
Because like the second poetry anthology I ever edited, like all the way back in 2010, it was a poetry anthology having to do with autism. And that book sold to so many people who were not poets, and a lot of people who didn't even, poetry isn't even something they necessarily cared for, because they related to the topic. And so, and then the book got invited to all sorts of like autism conferences and disability conventions, and mental health organizations started actually giving it out as like a text in some cases and stuff like that. It was like, it tapped into this whole like market, like never expected and never even thought about, just because of the topic. And that's one of the benefits of definition and doing that. And yeah, the selling to only poets thing, though, that's something that we see authors do time and time again, when they come out with a book and then they advertise, like maybe they'll have a book launch. I mean, a lot of them don't even bother having a book launch, but some of them, they'll have a book launch, but all they do is they advertise the book to all the poets in their local community, and that's it.
Yeah.
It's like, there's a lot of other people out there who might be interested in this if it's about something they'd be interested in.
If only we had a way to communicate with people all over the world instantaneously from our homes. That
I
would be
know, right?
great.
Yeah, that would be really good.
Well,
But then again, I mean, when it comes to like, somebody's first book, one little secret that we always tell everybody is, if you're a person who has relationships with pretty much anybody for any reason, whatever your first book is about, you're going to sell some copies of it, just by the fact that people will like you,
especially
because
if you have
it's,
parents.
well, that certainly helps. Mom will definitely get a copy. But no, like, I've known people who, it's like, they're really active in their church, and so they came out with a book. It has nothing to do with the church, but all the people there really like this person, want to support them, so they came out to their book launch. Like 50, 60 copies sold just from their church congregation. and stuff like that. Like other people who, part of teachers, their students want to buy it. Like just people who, if you're a person who people know and they like, they will buy it and you will sell some copies. Now, your second book, on the other hand, by that point, you better actually start accumulating some actual fans because the goodwill nature of everybody in your life who likes you and will just buy it to support you starts to run out by the time the second book comes out. So by that point, having built relationships, and having people who actually enjoy the stuff is, really important.
Or having a strong team helps.
Yeah.
I mean, I think about I have a friend who participated in. She was a part of a group of breast cancer survivors or breast cancer patients at the time, and they got together to write to sort of cope with what they were going through and put all their writing, their poetry, and there were I think also like memoir nonfiction, you know, prose pieces
Hmm.
into a book. They published it, and this was back in the 90s. And that book was actually used to train medical students on bedside manner
Yeah.
because it gives you an idea of like this is what your patient is dealing with. This is how you handle that. So yeah, having a strong theme, you never know where that's going to crop up.
Yeah, and speaking about poetry about breast cancer, and there's another poet no who's published her book years ago. She's actually a doctor who deals with breast cancer, and she wrote a poetry book about her experiences with that. And she's like not even trying to sell the book or even doing it at poetry thing. She goes to medical conferences having to deal with that topic. The idea that she has this book is dropped either by her or somebody else, and then she'll sell like 20, 30 copies online just by having been there, for that. So, and that's like, you don't really think like a bunch of doctors are going to be buying poetry books like based on that, but that a bunch of them, medical professionals, they're all interested in it and they do it just by happenstance of the topic. So,
Yeah,
uh,
it's not about the fact that it's poetry, it's about what that poetry is about. I mean, think about the Odyssey or the Epic of Gilgamesh. When you read those, you don't think about them as you're reading poetry. I mean, it's almost like ancient fantasy novels.
yeah,
And so it's it's about it's not about the fact that it's poetry, it's about the story. It's just that the story happens to be in poetry form.
yeah.
So this is just writing about a topic that just happens to be in poetry form.
Yeah, definitely. And as far as to like the mechanics of how to actually build a readership, again, with the internet, there's so many ways to do that. I mean, first of all, if you have a poetry community in your area, if you're fortunate enough for that, obviously become a part of your poetry community. Just for the fact that for one, you're going to get a lot out of it because you'll get practice reading. You'll hear a lot of great stuff. You'll make connections that'll be really valuable, and you'll build an audience organically that way, at least some audience. And then online, there's so many tools to do that. Again, you can start a blog to start building a readership that way. Post it to social media. Like don't spam it to social media. I know that there's a lot of people who like they go to poetry groups online and they just constantly like, they're just like posting every poem that they do to the point that people want them kicked out of the freaking group because it's literally just spamming. So, don't do that. But, if there's something, that you just want to share with people or whatever, you think that, maybe it's related to something else somebody shared or something, there's an organic, genuine way to do it. Um, Also, I mean, if you have a Facebook page or whatever, throwing a few bucks in an ad to connect it with people who actually care about what the stuff is about couldn't hurt. You could start that with as little as $10 or $20 and get, a few dozen readers just that way. But then you could use all these tools basically just build up a readership somewhere and just a way to kind of let them know when the book is coming out or your next book is coming out or whatever. And that it can happen organically that way. And don't knock the numbers because there's some people who like the milk and honey story, the person that had an Instagram following that had like, lots and lots and lots of people on there. So when that book came out, it was like an instant bestseller just from that. I mean, obviously that's the exception. But I've seen a lot of people do basically that same thing just on a smaller scale, where maybe it's not like, hundreds of thousands of copies, but maybe, you have a readership, you sell 1,000 copies, so, and that's still, a sizable audience and worth it. Because, with poetry, the bestseller numbers are a little bit less on average than they are in some other genres, but, again, they could still be very high.
Yeah, and I mean I think the big moral of the lesson is use what you have.
Mhm.
Um, if you have an Instagram following of 100,000 people, great, use it. If you have two best friends and a pickup truck, great, use it. You use whatever means that it most organically fits what you already have going on. Um, and I guess then the other key is organic, right? Like
Yeah.
don't go out of your way to get in people's face and try to sell to them. Let them come to you and let it be natural. And I know
Yeah.
that's hard because it takes patience.
Mhm.
And you might not sell a whole lot at first, but if you want to build a lasting following with people who are actually going to want to read your stuff and want you around their community and want you posting in their Facebook groups, uh, that's the best way to do it.
Yeah, definitely. Knowing, again, matchmaking is 90% of it. Knowing your audience is also a really big part of it.
Yeah.
Because one thing that, like, a lot of these whole, like, best-selling book marketing gurus, they talk about things like, all right, like, get yourself a list of bookstores and send a press release to every bookstore. I've been the victim of some of those, and I can tell you they're not very impressive. First of all. Second of all, it's like that's broadcasting. Just because somebody it's a bookstore, somebody sells books doesn't mean they're going to give a crap about your book. It's like, on the other hand, like, from we do a lot with, like, some local anthologies that we do. Like, say that we're doing a poetry anthology that's based in North Carolina, and it's a community anthology. It's like we might reach out to some bookstores or some gift shops in North Carolina, that tell them, hey, this is a bunch of local people in your area, and some of the poems are actually written about something right up the street from you, or actually maybe even about, like, your bakery or your store or something. So would you might be interested in this. And a lot of times, some of the messages get ignored, or people are just like, oh, that's nice, but no thank you. But then sometimes people are like, oh yeah, that'd be great, I'll take 10 copies. And so it's like, because there's an actual reason to do so. So again, matchmaking.
Yeah, and I know James mentioned this earlier, sort of, but getting involved in your poetry communities, going to readings, and particularly getting features at readings, but even going to open mics and reading your poetry there, you're going to get people's attention. People are going to naturally like your stuff, especially if you learn to perform your poetry well, which is probably a whole other topic in itself. But if you can wow people with the open mic or at your featured readings, you're going to get people's attention. They're going to want to buy your book that way. If you have anything that you're doing where you would end up on a podcast or something where you have a general audience, bringing your poetry onto there, if it's appropriate, it might be useful. And the if it's appropriate part is really important, because if you're on a podcast about, I don't know, model trains, has nothing to do with poetry, and you get up there and you read a poem about cultivating bananas, um, it's not going to make sense. It's not going to fit. Just because your best friend has that podcast and you are also interested in model trains doesn't mean that it's going to be a good fit for that audience. And a lot of people are going to say, "Who the heck is this guy? What is it? What are they doing here? Get them off of here. We want to hear about trains again." Um,
And now
so
I know what the next anthology theme is going to be: cultivating bananas.
for health, right?
For health.
Uh,
Yeah.
so you want to obviously make sure it's appropriate, and the same goes for Facebook groups, those darn Facebook groups where people are, there's the group about poetry publishing where that one person for like 2 years was, I just came out with this poem, I just came out with this poem, and they're posting every one of their poems in a book focused on publishing.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that the word poetry is in the title, but it's not specifically about posting your poetry. It's about people discussing their experiences with publishing and helping each other get published and sharing publishing opportunities.
Yeah, and posting a poem that you might be asking, like, any places I could get this published, that'd be fine. But just, like,
Right.
spamming your entire itinerary,
It's
that's
every day there was at least one.
mhm.
I
Yeah.
I wonder if we're thinking of the same group.
I think we are, but yeah. So organic is kind of the important part, and yeah, it may be slow at first if you're starting from nothing, but take your time in building it. Just little by little, it's worth it, because you get to a point where suddenly you realize you have a lot more readers than you really realize you do, and you may already even be at that point. Maybe there's a lot more people out there who'd be interested in your book than you even realize, at this point. And again, the numbers can always be added to in this day and age. You can always find other people interested in your topic, or anything like that.
Yeah, and the internet's amazing.
Hmm. So, and of course, again, if you're interested in knowing more about this, just keep a watch out for our seminars, our seminar series, and our talks about that, because we offer them pretty frequently, and we can go a lot into the marketing side of things about this, because there is no shortage of stuff to talk about. We probably could sit here for another 6 hours talking about that and still barely scratch the surface. So, um, but yeah, hopefully we at least gave you a general answer to this question about how to get the book out there. Again, this is the publisher speakeasy. Shh, don't tell anybody. in the description, there'll actually be a link for you to get 90 free poetry prompts, if you're interested in that. And if you have questions, anything related to this topic or something else about, poetry publishing, etc., we'll let you know how you can send in a question, and maybe we'll answer it in one of these episodes. Again, I'm James P. Wagner,
And I'm Nick Hale.
and we'll see you next time. Take
Bye,
care.
everybody.